The night was heavy with rain when Mason dug through the freezing mud, his fingernails breaking, skin tearing. Every scoop of dirt echoed with one thought: my boy's still down there. He wasn't burying a coffin. He was clawing through hell to find what was left of his soul. The cartel thought they ended a family. They just created a storm. Hit like, subscribe for more betrayal stories, and comment your city or country. A small town outside El Paso, quiet streets, broken lights, and the smell of dust and diesel even in the rain. Mason Burke had been gone 20 years from the war, but that night, his training returned like a ghost calling him home. Layers of rain mixed with muddy tears as he stared into the open field where police lights flashed, blue, red, and useless. The deputy mumbled something about cartel retaliation, a burned-out truck found at the border, but Mason didn't hear a word. He only heard the silence, the kind that chokes a man's chest when the world stops meaning anything. The last message from his son, Caleb, still burned on his phone screen. A short video, shaky and terrified. "Dad, they said you did something wrong to them. Please, just..." Then the sound cut, replaced by a muffled scream and dirt sliding. That was 12 hours ago. Now, standing near the construction ditch behind the old river road, Mason saw the shovel marks. Not random, not kids. Trenches. Fresh. He stumbled forward, dropped to his knees, and started digging barehanded. Cops tried to grab him. He shoved them off. "Don't touch me. Don't. Just..." He's still here. He couldn't even finish the sentence. By dawn, his hands were shredded, fingertips bleeding into the soil. But there was no body. Just Caleb's dog tags. Bent. Mud-covered. Still warm from the rain. He pressed them to his chest, staring at the horizon, whispering words no one else heard. That night birthed something darker than grief. Something patient. Cold. Resolute. The man called Seal Ghost was gone for years, but pain resurrects old monsters. At dawn, he sat alone in his truck outside his house. The window fogged. The rain turned to mist. He watched the porch light flicker. Brooke was inside, pretending to sleep, pretending to grieve. He waited, staring at the hollow windows, the same way a soldier studies a target before breaching a room. When the door opened, she stepped out in silence. Her hair pulled back, eyes red, but not from crying. "Did they find him?" she asked softly. He shook his head. "Not yet." Her voice cracked, too perfectly timed. "Oh God." He looked through her, not at her. "Did he call you last night?" Her eyes flinched, a fraction too slow. "No, why?" Mason gave a heavy exhale. "Because he tried me. And someone was in the background." His wife went still. "Maybe the police?" He leaned closer. "No, it wasn't the police. It was Spanish." Her gaze broke. She stepped back. He caught it, the truth trying to crawl out through her silence. Hours later, Mason drove to the edge of town, where the asphalt fades into mud near the border fields. He found tire treads. Same model as Brooke's car. Fresh. He followed the trail half a mile before finding something worse. A gold locket half buried in dirt. Inside, her photo, and one more. A tattooed man with the cartel's mark, a viper curled around a black rose. He couldn't breathe. The pieces locked in too fast, too violent. The call, the fear, the vanishing. Brooke's distant eyes. The cartel's warning from years ago. In that moment, grief turned into something exact, quiet, measured rage. He knew who to call. At the edge of an abandoned barn, Mason burned a flare and dropped it to the ground. Within 10 minutes, a black SUV rolled up. From it stepped Grant, his old SEAL teammate, now working deep cover for Homeland. "You said it was personal," Grant muttered. "Looks like it." Mason handed him the locket. She knew them. Or one of them. Maybe more. Grant's face darkened. Which crew? Victor Ruiz. That name alone made Grant curse. That's cartel royalty, Mason. You don't knock on his door, you vanish. Mason's eyes stayed still on the storm clouds rolling over the ridge. He buried my son alive. Then call the feds. They'll take too long. Grant sighed. Then what's your plan? To feed wolves. He meant it, and Grant knew better than to stop him. That night, Mason walked into his house like a shadow. He stood behind the door, watching Brooke in candlelight, scrolling her phone. She jumped when she saw him. I didn't hear you. You texted him last night. Her lips parted, then trembled. Who? The man with the tattoo. Her voice cracked just slightly. Mason, you're scaring me. He stepped closer, whispering. Good. She slapped him. Stop it. You've gone crazy. He just stared. The space between them stretched tight, like a wire about to snap. She backed toward the stairs. I need air, she muttered. He let her go, but watched every reflection, every shadow she moved through. When her car taillights disappeared down the foggy road, Mason grabbed his jacket and followed from a distance. He didn't need words now. He needed confirmation. The dirt road led him 2 miles out of town, past a junkyard near the rail fence. Her car stopped by a rusted gate. Another truck appeared from the opposite side. A man stepped out, tall, leather jacket, snake tattoo on his wrist. He greeted her like they'd met 100 times. She reached out, touched his face. Mason clenched the steering wheel till it creaked. His breathing slowed, became mechanical. The sergeant in him calculating, compartmentalizing. They talked for minutes. Then she turned slightly. Just enough for him to catch one line through the cold air. He found out. He knows about us. Mason didn't rage. He didn't even blink. He rolled the window down halfway, cold wind cutting his face, and whispered, Then he'll find out what happens when the dead start digging back. He returned home just before sunrise. The house was silent, too neat, too staged. He sat at the table, staring at Caleb's photo, dusty, cracked. Next to it lay his SEAL badge, the thin black patch reading Ghost. He took out a small notebook, wrote 4 names: Victor, Rico, Andre, Luis, the Cartel crew. Next to them, one more name: Brooke. He circled it. Once. He showered in silence, steam fogging the mirror. His reflection looked older. Not from time, from everything he'd lost. He whispered, I told you I'd never kill again. But war has a different definition for men like him. The last scene fades in. A close-up of Mason lighting 4 candles on the ground outside, one for each name. He digs a hole in the mud, not to bury them, but to mark them. Rain trickles down his face, almost like the earth is weeping alongside him. Then, his phone buzzes on the truck hood. A hidden number. He answers. A gravelly voice speaks in broken English. We warned you once, Ghost. Static. Then silence. Mason looks out into the storm. He places the dog tags around his neck, grips the shovel, and whispers just one line before fading to black. Then hear me now. I'm warning you back. Morning light came like punishment. Mason hadn't slept. His eyes burned from hours spent tracing border maps and old intel files spread across his kitchen table. Coffee had gone cold hours ago. His pulse never did. He studied the names again. Victor Ruiz, Rico Alvarez, Andre Vega, and Luis Cortez. For men. The core of the Ruiz cartel's transport arm. They'd moved drugs, weapons, and, to Mason's horror, sometimes kids. He flipped through the evidence Grant sent overnight. Blurred photographs from drone ops years back. Among them, a picture of Andre Vega standing beside a white cargo van. The same van from the footage where his son's scream had cut off. Mason pressed his thumb hard against the photo until the edges crumpled. Outside, rain had turned the dirt into amber lakes. Wind chimes hit the porch post. Brooke hadn't come home. Her absence was almost merciful. Silence was safer than lies. He walked through the house once more, scanning the details with trained precision. The dust-free counter where she always prepared 2 cups of tea, one for herself, one she used to leave by their son's room. The framed wedding photo turned face down on the shelf. The smallest details screamed guilt louder than words could. He picked up the phone, called the sheriff's office. Any progress? The deputy asked. None, Mason replied. I'll find them myself. He hung up before they could answer. By evening, he drove south toward the border, where the heat blurs everything, even truth. He avoided highways, instead following the unpaved path that led to an old chapel ruin known as La Piedad de Arena. It looked abandoned, but for years it had served as a waypoint for smugglers, a place where the dead went unnamed. Rows of wooden crosses lined the sand behind it, crude markers, unpainted, fading under the desert sun. Names were scratched out, some replaced by initials. He crouched near one marked with a rough C. Fresh soil. Something inside his chest locked up, hope and dread clashing in the same breath. He reached down to move the loose dirt, heart racing. Not bones, just a cloth scrap, part of his son's hoodie. He pressed it to his face, eyes shut. Whoever buried this wanted him to find it. A message. The sound of an engine made him turn sharply. A black pickup rolled up, headlights killing the dusk. Two figures stepped out, one holding a rifle, the other lighting a cigarette. Mason didn't flinch. He watched from cover as they walked toward the crosses. They said ghost is sniffing again. One said, voice cutting through in Spanish. Let him. The other replied, exhaling smoke. He'll end up under one of these two. The cigarette fell to the sand. They laughed. Mason's hand slid into his jacket, fingers brushing against the grip of his service pistol. But he didn't draw. Not yet. Instead, he listened, memorizing their tone, dialect, tattoos. Both small-time enforcers, not targets, but messengers. When they drove off, Mason followed them from a distance, staying in the dust line of their tires. They passed the checkpoint, turned onto a hidden road that hugged the ridge overlooking an old mill. It was there he saw it. Brooks' car parked behind a stack of cargo crates. The truth doesn't come peacefully, it crashes in waves. Mason got out quietly, crouching in the shadows. Through a broken window of the mill, he spotted Brooke pacing under the swinging light. Opposite her, a man with the viper tattoo, the same one from the photo. They were arguing. You told me it would be over, she snapped. That no one would get hurt. The man's tone was low, controlled. You think he ever listens? You married a SEAL, sweetheart. We told you this would happen if word got out. I never wanted this. He smirked. You didn't mind the money, or the nights when your husband was gone and I wasn't. Mason felt something inside him die quietly, not from anger, from finality. Truth hurts more when it confirms what you feared most. Brooks' voice cracked. Victor's going to kill me if he finds out. He won't. The man interrupted. He already moved on. You think he keeps the same woman twice? That line hit her. Mason watched her shoulders collapse, her body tremble like someone realizing too late they'd sold their soul for nothing. She rushed out of the building moments later, tears mixing with night dust. He didn't follow. He wasn't ready to face her lie with words. He wanted facts first, evidence to burn the whole truth alive. He waited until she drove off, then slipped inside. The man still stood by the crate, talking on a satellite phone. Yes, boss. Burke is back. He's seen the graves. Yeah, I think she told he. Mason moved like wind, silent, precise. One hit to the neck dropped the man before he even drew. Mason dragged him into the shadows, zip-tied his wrists, gagged his mouth, and pointed his pistol to his temple. Where's Victor? The man's eyes flicked sideways. Mason twisted the zip tie until it bit through skin. Where? En Mazatlan, the ranch, the man gasped. Your boy. He never made it south. They left him at the pit. What pit? The red quarry, near the train tracks. Before he could finish, headlights flooded through the windows. 2 more trucks. Back up. Mason had seconds. He pulled the man's phone, pressed it against his chest. You'll be found the way you buried others. He shot out the lights, slipped through the west window, vanished into the brush before the others entered. He didn't look back. The night bled into morning again. He parked his truck near the old tracks leading to the red quarry, a scarred stretch of land surrounded by dead machinery and bullet-riddled warning signs. Inside the pit, he found more crude crosses. No names, just numbers. Each grave had a different story, but the same silence. Some old, Some just days fresh. He examined footprints, tire patterns, all too familiar to the cartel's ops. Then he saw it, a small metallic glint half buried in the dirt. A silver bracelet, the one his son wore, hand engraved with the words, Dad's Shadow. His entire body locked. He dropped to his knees again, the sound escaping his lungs not human nor animal. He pressed the bracelet to his forehead, whispering, I found you. I found you, kid. He didn't cry. He hadn't cried since his first kill overseas. But that day, tears mixed with red dust and rain until the earth looked like it was bleeding with him. Back in town, reporters swarmed his street. Burke, they say you're taking justice into your own hands, one shouted. He ignored them. People always show up when it's too late to help. Inside his house, evidence covered the walls. Photos, maps, and connection lines drawn across Victor's empire. He marked each thug with a red cross. One for each grave. One for each broken promise. The last mark he made wasn't a face. It was Brooke's wedding ring. He pinned it to the map beside Victor's photo. By evening, he stood outside a small county church. Caleb's funeral was short, barely 10 guests, mostly locals who whispered behind hands. The coffin was empty, but Mason didn't care. He placed the dog tags atop it, exhaled once, and said quietly, You'll rest when they do. Brooke stood at the far side of the chapel, wrapped in black lace and gilt. She didn't meet his eyes. She just whispered, I'm sorry, to the ground. He walked past her without slowing, without turning back. Outside, he noticed a black SUV drive by. Tinted windows, slow enough to watch, but not stop. Grant was right. They were watching him now. That night, Mason returned to the quarry once more. 4 crosses stood there now, freshly planted by his own hand. But not to mourn, to mark. He painted names on each with black tar. Andre, Rico, Luis, Victor. He stood back, exhaled, and whispered, This is not burial. This is countdown. As lightning cracked across the desert sky, he loaded his rifle, slung his pack, and walked away. A ghost fading into the storm, no words, no hesitation. Behind him, the 4 crosses swayed in the wind, their shadows stretching long across the sand, like the souls of the men who didn't yet realize their graves were already waiting. Morning arrived hollow and pale. Mason stood over the 4 crosses he'd painted in the desert, the wind pushing dust around them like ghosts trying to whisper. He wiped the sweat from his face, jaw tight. The storm inside him had a direction now. The man who once bled for his country was gone. What remained was the quiet soldier who didn't need commands, only purpose. Back at the safe house, Mason unpacked a black duffel he hadn't touched in years. Inside, a weathered knife with SEAL Team logos, a field recorder, an encrypted radio, and one solitary patch, Ghost. He pressed it flat against the table, staring until his reflection blurred. Those years of controlled silence, discipline, order, training, felt distant now. There's a kind of calm that only men who've buried children understand. It's not peace, it's focus. He opened the notebook again. On the first line, he wrote the name of his target, Andre Vega, cartel transporter, execution ground supervisor, current hideout, unknown. But he had one advantage. Ghosts never forget voices. The recording he took from the mill still had Andre laughing in the background, a voice he'd know anywhere. He uploaded it to an old military spectral analysis program and compared it against a database of intercepted calls provided through an old favor from Grant. 10 minutes later, the software pinged. Voice match, 92%. Location trace, Nogales District, a junkyard on the southern edge of the border route. Mason marked the coordinates, closed his notebook, and whispered, First 1 feeds tonight. He reached Nogales before sunset, driving an old gray pickup, windows dusty, plates unregistered. The junkyard stretched across 3 acres of dead machinery, rusted buses, and stacked cars under orange, dying light. Dogs barked inside somewhere. He killed the engine and waited, watching through binoculars as three figures gathered near a barrel fire. One man's posture, the way he rolled his neck, wore the red watch band, matched Andre's photo from Grant's dossier. Mason smiled grimly. Found you. He waited until night settled fully, then slipped through a side gate using a bent crowbar to lift the lock. Shadows were his language. One step at a time, no sound, no reflection. Inside an abandoned bus shell, he set up a small directional mic to record. He needed confessions, not corpses. Ghosts without proof only remained stories. He wanted truth carved in sound. From his hiding spot, he overheard the men talking in low Spanish. Victor's worried. The soldier's alive. Andre laughed, smoke curling from his lips. He won't come here. His wife already settled things. Another man asked, You mean the woman? She knew exactly where to send her boy. Don't act surprised. They both got paid. Mason's chest tightened, the old wound opening wider. Even now, Brooks' betrayal kept bleeding through every wall he built. He stepped out from the shadows, gun raised. Don't move. Three heads turned toward him, panic cutting through bravado. For a moment, no one breathed. The fire snapped between them like it understood what was coming. Andre squinted, disbelief on his face. No way you're ghost, Mason finished. Keep talking. Say the line again. About my boy. Andre's smirk vanished, replaced by a shake in his jaw. You don't scare me, old man. The gun fired once. The bullet took off part of the barrel fire's rim, flaring sparks inches from Andre's face. Next one's not a warning, Mason said coldly. Tell me where Victor is. The youngest thug bolted. Mason spun and dropped him with a single shot to the shoulder. Don't, he warned. The man screamed, clutching dirt. Andre looked at him, then at the wolves beyond the junkyard fence, 6 of them, thin, starving, trapped from the cartel's old dogfighting ring. Mason had read the reports. He knew they kept them pinned out here, unfed for days, used to get confessions. Remember them? Mason asked softly. You used to punish people with those wolves. Andre swallowed. Please, we were just following orders. That's why I'm not shooting you, Mason replied, voice level. You'll talk, or you'll feed the same hunger you created. He tied Andre's wrists with wire cables and dragged him toward the pen. The wolves howled from the other side, frantic, desperate. Mason stopped 2 feet short of the gate. Where's Victor? Andre sobbed, fear finally cutting through arrogance. He moved north, Albuquerque safe house. But he changes every week, I swear. Mason's voice dropped to a whisper. And Brooke? What was her role? She handled intel transfers, Andre said quickly. They paid her through the charity fund she managed. She thought she was paying protection. Mason knew it was partly true, partly rehearsed. Brooke always wanted to believe she was clean. He recorded every word, then dropped the gun magazine, leaving 1 bullet chambered. You'll get a quick end. I'm not like you. Andre shook his head rapidly. No, please. Mason fired into the lock of the wolf gate. The metal burst open. The beasts charged forward, their snarls tearing through night. Mason turned his back and walked calmly toward the fence as chaos erupted behind him. He didn't wait for silence. By the time the first scream echoed, Mason was already gone. Back inside his truck, he reviewed the audio file. The confession was clear enough to build a case. But justice meant nothing to him anymore, not the courtroom kind. He uploaded the recording to an encrypted drive and sent it to Grant with a single message, Piece 1. Grant replied minutes later, You're crossing lines, Mason. Vega's death just triggered Cartel intel chatter. They're alert now. Mason typed back. Then it's working. He turned the ignition and drove into the darkness again, the night swallowing the noise until the road became an endless tunnel of memory and regret. At dawn, he pulled up outside a motel on Route 83. It looked like every place the forgotten go, flickering sign, 1 working light, cigarette burns on furniture. Inside, the air was thick with dust and cheap cologne. He set his pack on the bed and pulled out a folded photograph. Him, Brooke, and Caleb at a baseball game years ago. Her hand rested on his son's shoulder. That same hand that later signed his death warrant disguised as paperwork. He tore the photo down the middle, kept the half with the boy, and burned the rest in the ashtray. Ghosts have no families, he muttered. Then came a soft knock at the door. He drew instantly, keeping silent. Another knock. This one rhythmic, not cartel style. Controlled. 3 beats. Pause. One more. The old SEAL signal. Grant. Mason unlocked the door. Grant entered, eyes scanning the room. You didn't have to feed him to wolves. Mason said flatly. He fed my son to dirt. Grant sighed. You're making this harder for me. Homeland's starting to pick up traces. Victor's men are panicking. They just grabbed someone in town, Brooke. That stopped him cold. What? She's missing since last night. They took her. Probably suspect she leaked location data to you. Mason sunk into the chair, rubbing his temples. The irony cut deep. Even after everything, she was bait again, this time from the other side. Grant looked at him. What's your play now? Mason exhaled, steel in his tone. I'm not saving a woman who sold our boy. But she's leverage. They want me to move. I'll move, straight to the top. Grant hesitated. Victor's not an easy man. Even ghosts vanish around him. Mason looked up with eyes like ash. So will he. Later that night, Mason returned to his truck. Before leaving, he pulled out a folded note from his glove box. Caleb's handwriting from years ago. When I grow up, I'll be strong like you, Dad. But not angry. Mom says anger makes you lose your way. He folded the note gently and tucked it inside his jacket pocket. The irony hit hard. His son saw clearer than he ever did. But this wasn't anger anymore. It was restoration. As he drove west toward the border again, the radio caught fragments of a Mexican news report. Local authorities discovered remains believed to belong to a cartel affiliate. Last seen near Nogales, authorities suspect retaliation. He switched it off, staring at the empty stretch of road ahead. Rain began again. He whispered into the quiet. That's one soul down. 3 to go. The red taillights vanished into the night like 2 angry eyes fading into the storm. Night fell without stars. Mason drove through sheets of rain that turned the roads into veins of reflected lightning. The windshield wipers barely kept up as thunder rolled across the desert sky, quiet then deafening, like the war drums of old ghosts. Andre Vega's name was finally crossed off the list, but there was no satisfaction. There never is when you've buried your own. Now there were 3 names left. Victor Ruiz, Rico Alvarez, Luis Cortez. The car's dashboard clock glowed 2:43 a.m. when a text from Grant came through the burner phone. Intercepted comms. Rico and Luis are holding at a freight yard outside Albuquerque. Victor relocating north within 48 hours. Move fast. No cavalry. Too exposed. Mason folded the phone shut, lit a cigarette just to watch the smoke cut through the shadows. 2 lives between him and the man who buried his son alive. 2 more wrongs before the final judgment. He drove until the storm thinned into mist, and the smell of rust and fuel coated the air. The Albuquerque freight yard was abandoned half a decade ago, now a graveyard of steel containers and graffiti. Perfect for men who needed the world to forget them. He parked half a mile out, slipped through the barbed fence, and scoped the field from high ground. Through rain-soaked binoculars, he saw them. 3 men by a fire in an open container. One of them was Rico, the youngest, fast, reckless, a loose cannon Mason remembered from old border surveillance footage. They were laughing. They had beer. And they had no idea how close death sat. He moved through shadows with a soldier's patience. Each footstep exact, knees bent low, breath slow enough not to fog the night vision lens. There are rules in covert work. No attachment, no hesitation. But Mason carried no reason to follow rules anymore. Every step closer brought back flashes. Caleb's laugh echoing through their backyard. Brooke's smile when she still looked at him like a man and not a ghost. And then the sound of dirt collapsing. The scream cut short. The silence. He reached the closest container, climbed its ladder quietly, and positioned himself at the roof's edge overlooking the fire. The men talked in half Spanish, half English, stories about shipments and dead border guards. Rico bragged like a kid too in love with his own evil. Victor says the soldier's still out there. Guy thinks he's a phantom, Rico laughed. He don't know we already took his family apart once. You think he'd learn? Laughter followed. A can cracked open. That was when Mason let the first sound slip, the click of a cartridge chambering. It wasn't loud, but silence amplifies everything. Rico turned his head too late. The rifle cracked once. The bullet sliced through his can, grazing his cheek before slamming into the barrel behind him. Panic erupted. Men scrambled for cover, firing blindly into the dark. Mason dropped to the ground, rolled behind a loader, and counted bullets. 1, 2, 3, silence. He moved again. A figure dashed toward the gate. Mason swung, grabbed the man by the collar, and slammed him against steel. The man's eyes widened. Luis Cortez. Another name from his list. The muzzle pressed beneath his jaw. Where's Victor? Luis stammered. Who are you? Mason's whisper was colder than the rain. The voice you buried alive. Luis froze, tried to plead, then broke down in mid-sentence. He said the boy died easy. We didn't mean. Mason slammed him against the wall. You left a child gasping for air. Victor told us. Luis shouted, desperate now. He said it was leverage against the wife. She owed him. The words stopped Mason. The wife. Brooke. Even now, her fingerprints stained everything. Mason's jaw clenched, rain dripping from his lashes. He used her. She worked through him. She gave him access. She thought it would end a debt. Luis whimpered. She didn't know it would go that far. Mason took a step back, voice steady but hollow. You're lying. I'm not. Rico was the one who, a shot cut him off. Rico, bleeding but alive, had fired from behind a stack of crates. The bullet tore past Mason's arm, grazing his skin. Mason spun, dropped Luis instinctively, and fired back twice. Rico dropped instantly. Silence swallowed the yard. Only rain. Only the smell of powder and blood floating between steel. Luis was still breathing, moaning softly. Mason crouched down beside him. You shouldn't have mentioned debt, Mason said quietly. Now I know what to look for. Luis coughed. Please, don't leave me. Mason nodded toward the edge of the perimeter fence, where 3 thin wolves, half-starved, desert wilds turned scavenger, slinked from the dark. He tossed the last of his cigarette toward Luis. The flare lit orange in the wet ground. They haven't eaten in days. You already know the rest. He turned and walked away before the first growl began. By dawn, the freight yard burned. From miles away, the smoke rose dark against the red horizon. Mason parked off the highway shoulder, wrapped his arm in bandages, and stared quietly at the reflection of fire in the rearview mirror. He whispered to the photo half buried in his dashboard. I found 2. He crossed 2 names off the notebook list. Only 1 remained. Victor Ruiz. The text alert from Grant came next. Brooke located. She's alive, but she's lying low near the border courthouse under new identity papers. Want location? Mason stared at it long and hard before typing back. Send anyway. By afternoon, he stood across the street from a small cafe in Las Cruces. The windows steamed from fresh coffee and rain. Behind the counter, Brooke poured drinks, her hair shorter, posture smaller. For a long moment he said nothing. Didn't move. Just watched the woman he once loved pretend to be someone new. He walked inside quietly, hands in his jacket pockets. The bell above the door chimed. Brooke froze mid-step, sensed him before seeing him. The mug slipped, shattering. Mason, she whispered. She looked thinner, eyes rimmed red. He didn't answer. Didn't sit. Just leaned slightly on the counter. They said you were dead, she murmured. I thought, he cut her off softly. You thought it'd be easier if I was. She said his name again, voice trembling. I made mistakes. You have no idea what they threatened. What Victor? Mason's stare pierced through her excuses. I know what you did. You sent him to them. Tears welled. They said it was protection, They told me you owed Victor from your SEAL contracts. They said they'd keep Caleb safe. He slammed his palm against the counter, the sound cutting her voice. You believe cartel dealers over your husband. She stepped back, shaking. I was trying to save us. I didn't know they'd. He exhaled, eyes finally softening for a fraction. Say his name, Brooke. Her lips parted, barely audible. Caleb. It broke her more than it healed him. He turned toward the door. She cried out, Wait. Victor's hunting you now. He blames me. He said you took something from him when you killed Andre. You have no idea what he's planning. Mason stopped under the doorway, rain dripping off his jacket brim. Then let him plan. I'm already coming. And he walked out into the storm again. That night, he sat alone near mile marker 9, overlooking the desert valley where the cartel convoys had passed 100 times before. Every sound out there, the wind, the scraping branches, the low howl of wolves, felt like the land itself was restless, waiting for justice to balance its weight. He opened his notebook one last time. One name left, Victor Ruiz. He could almost hear his son's voice in the hum of the engine, soft but certain. Don't lose your way, Dad. Mason whispered into the dark. No, not my way. Just his. The thunder rolled again, distant but coming closer, just like him. He started the truck, tires throwing gravel behind as the camera of the story would tilt upward, following the taillights disappearing into the desert night. Only one voice remained alive on the list, and Ghost was finally on the hunt. The sky turned copper by dawn, the kind of desert light that burns what it touches but never warms a thing. Mason's truck sat half-hidden behind an old gas station ruin 3 miles east of the border checkpoint. He hadn't moved for hours. Sleep felt like a luxury for men who still had something to lose. Victor Ruiz. The name repeated in his skull with every heartbeat. The last man. The man who ordered his son's burial. The man who still controlled the woman who'd betrayed them both. The phone buzzed. Grant again. Checkpoint logs show Ruiz convoy routed north tonight. Smuggling Corridor 12. 10 guards, 2 trucks. Your window's small. Mason typed back. I only need 1 truck. He packed light. Rifle, combat knife, satellite comm, and a flash drive holding every confession so far. The evidence could end Victor legally. But Mason wasn't sure he believed in legal endings anymore. He drove north until the desert straightened into highway. Cactus silhouettes flashed past like broken spears under the morning sun. On the passenger seat, his son's bracelet glinted faintly. Every small movement of the truck sent it swinging against the dashboard. A heartbeat for the dead. By midday, he reached an overlook above the route Grant mentioned. He scoped through the long-range lens. 2 cargo trucks rumbled through the valley, armed vehicles flanking either side. Dust rose behind them in perfect rhythm, cartel choreography. He found himself whispering names again. Andre, Rico, Luis. Then Victor. He flipped open his comm, clicking into a single open frequency reserved from his SEAL days. Grant, I've got visual. 2 transports, northbound, GPS tag. Ready to move. Radio crackle. Copy. Just remember this isn't sanctioned. If it goes bad, it already went bad years ago. He cut the line and slid the comm into his vest pocket. When the convoy curved around the second ridge, a flash of silver caught his sight. A car following behind the trucks. Through his scope, Brooke. Her hair tied back, face covered under a scarf, riding beside one of Victor's lieutenants. It stopped everything inside him for half a second. Why was she with them again? Not as hostage. Her body language didn't read fear. There was tension, yes, but she wasn't restrained. And that burned deeper than any gunfire could. He intercepted the tail truck at dusk. Timing and silence. 2 allies that never fail a soldier who's lost everything. As the last vehicle slowed near the washout bridge, Mason cut across the embankment, sliding down in mud and shadow. By the time the driver stepped out to check the tires, Mason had already reached the cabin. He opened the passenger door quietly, gun raised, only to freeze. Brooke sat inside, hands trembling over the steering wheel, tear marks streaking her cheeks. "You shouldn't be here," Mason said. She turned slowly, eyes wide, voice breaking. "He made me help. Mason. Victor. He has people everywhere. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd finish what he started with Caleb." He studied her expression carefully, memorizing the shifting guilt behind her tears. "You're still lying to yourself." "I'm not. He owns the courthouse, the cops, even Grant's contacts. He knows about your every move." Mason's tone turned quiet. "Then why drive his truck?" Her mouth opened, words dying behind them. "Because this is the only way I could get to you first." Outside, gunfire cracked, shouts in Spanish echoing from the ridge. The convoy had seen the missing truck. Mason grabbed her wrist. "Listen to me. You stay low and run when I say." She stared at him, voice shaking through adrenaline and heartbreak. "Why are you still protecting me after everything?" "Because I promised the kid I wouldn't become what they are." They ran. Bullets tore the dust behind them. Mason rolled behind a concrete pipe, Brooke dropping beside him. The first truck exploded 20 feet away, fuel catching fire under the barrage. Smoke filled the sky, black and crawling. He reloaded, fired once, twice, each shot deliberate. This wasn't random fury, it was mathematical retribution. By the time silence fell again, only one engine remained running. Victor's armored SUV, speeding away toward the mountains. Brooke sobbed into her sleeve, coughing on ash. "You can't follow him alone." Mason stood, eyes fixed on the fading headlights. "He's running to his cage. Cages make targets simple." She reached for him. "He'll kill you." He looked down at her, calm, steady. "He already did." Then he turned and walked away through the wreckage, flames reflecting across his soaked jacket, the dog tags glinting in rhythm with every step. Hours later, at an abandoned cabin near Santa Rosa, he stitched the graze along his arm. The room smelled of old wood smoke and gun oil. Brooke sat across from him, holding a flask with both hands like it kept her from fading. "Mason," she whispered. "When Caleb disappeared, Victor told me it was punishment for you breaking contract after your last mission. He said you cost him military shipments, money, men. He made me call him, told me to lead Caleb out of town, just for a short talk. God forgive me, I believed him." He didn't respond. The needle kept moving through his skin, precise, cold. She tried again, her voice trembling lower. "I didn't know they'd bury him alive." The thread snapped. He let the needle drop, eyes locked on nothing. "You didn't ask what they wanted with a boy." Tears slid down her face. "I wanted it to stop. I thought cooperating would save us, not end us." He stood, paced slowly to the window, staring through the cracked pane at the endless dark beyond. "He used you because he knew I'd never pull the trigger on family. Mason, you have every right. You don't get to tell me what rights I have. You signed them away." Her breath caught, like someone punched the air out of her lungs. He turned back toward her, voice low but deadly calm. "Stay in this cabin until sunrise. Someone will find you. Don't leave. Don't follow me." She rose, desperate. "If you go after him, you'll never come back the same." He looked down at his bloodied hand, flexed once. "That part of me's already gone." He opened the door, rain slicing through the silence. She called out one last time, voice cracking in the emptiness. "He still has proof, Mason. Your son, Victor, filmed everything." That made him pause just once. Then he left without answering. Minutes later, the engine roared again. The highway stretched into black oblivion, each mile dragging him closer to whatever counted as an ending. The windshield reflected lightning, but inside, it was calm, determined. He checked the map Grant sent earlier. Victor's supposed estate high in the border canyons, surrounded by electricity fences, guard dogs, and old militia who never stopped pulling triggers for the right money. Mason smiled faintly, more memory than amusement. "Too bad I don't do money." As his truck merged with the storm rising over the hills, Caleb's bracelet clinked softly from the mirror, a reminder and a heartbeat all at once. Ghosts didn't rest. They finished what they started. The storm hadn't moved for hours. It crouched above the desert like a predator, lightning cutting through the clouds in flashes that turned the horizon pale white. Mason drove through it without slowing, tires spitting mud as if the truck itself wanted to fight. Victor Ruiz's estate lay somewhere beyond the ridgeline, a fortress carved into rock and silence. That was where this trail had to end. But Brooks' last words echoed like shrapnel lodged in his chest. He still has proof. Mason, your son. Victor filmed everything. He didn't believe it at first. Couldn't. But hope hurts differently when it's impossible. It keeps you breathing even when you don't want to. Mason stopped near a rundown highway diner 5 miles south of Las Palomas. The clock above the counter had stopped at 2:17. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and wet dust. One customer, a woman in a gray windbreaker, sat at the far booth scribbling notes and flipping through border surveillance photos. She looked up the moment he stepped in. Burke? He froze. Who's asking? She flashed a badge halfway out of her pocket. DA Task Force. Agent Fiona Hayes. Grant told me you'd reach out. He sat opposite her, watching the door reflection in the window. I didn't reach out. Fiona smiled like she already knew how he operated. You're making Cartel ghosts nervous. That makes me interested. Ruiz has half the federal office in his pocket. But he messed up. Shipments increased. Data flow sloppy. I can use that. Mason leaned forward. You can use it. I can end it. Fiona pushed a folder toward him. Satellite surveillance from last week. Ruiz left his main base 2 nights ago and moved to a private ranch near the limestone tunnels. They call it La Zora. Local legend says nobody leaves that place alive. He opened the folder, scanning the grainy images, a convoy, trucks, multiple buildings, dogs in cages. But one photo stopped him dead. A boy, maybe mid-teens, tied by the wrist to a fence post. Head shaved, face blurred in motion, too small for the timestamp to confirm. But the bracelet glinting on his wrist matched perfectly. His chest tightened so hard he forgot to breathe. Fiona kept her voice calm. That's from 2 weeks ago. We haven't confirmed identity. Mason whispered, barely audible. You don't have to. He closed the folder gently, as if it were sacred. Get me inside. You don't just walk into Ruiz territory alive, Fiona warned. You'll need someone who's already been burned by him. I know someone, Mason muttered. But I doubt she'll help again. Fiona read his expression and didn't push further. If that boy's your son, Burke, then we're already halfway to hell. He stood. Then that's where I started. 2 hours later, they drove through back roads clogged with mud. The truck's headlights cut narrow slices through falling rain. Fiona monitored the encrypted scanner, listening for cartel chatter. They're restless, she said. Something happened at the freight yard. You spooked them. Mason smirked faintly. Good. Fear makes men sloppy. They reached a canyon edge overlooking the ranch. Floodlights bathed the compound below. Men with rifles circled in shifts of 3. Fiona pulled out binoculars. Ruiz uses those tunnels to move bodies and drugs south. It's practically a graveyard. Mason scanned the far end. Graveyard works for me. He turned to go, but Fiona stopped him. You shouldn't do this alone. He gave her a look that wasn't unkind, just resolute. I'm not alone. Her brows furrowed. You mean Brooke? He didn't answer, just loaded the magazine with slow precision, like prayer and metal. The infiltration began at dawn. The world turned gray again, soft light barely touching the canyon edges. Fiona covered from the ridge, while Mason moved through a drainage pipe leading into the compound's perimeter. Years of combat instinct flattened his steps. Every motion calculated, short, efficient, silent. Near the kennel area, he froze, hearing muffled crying. He edged around the rusted tank, 2 men beating a teenager near the fence line. Mason's hands clenched around the rifle as the kid fell. The glint of metal at the boy's wrist caught his eye. For a moment, time folded backwards. He saw Caleb at 10, laughing with a baseball bat in the backyard. Then mud, screams, then stillness. He moved before thought could catch up. The first guard never saw it coming. A knife thrown clean through the throat. The second raised his gun, shouted, then dropped when Mason tackled him into the dirt. A choking gurgle, silence again. He dropped to his knees in front of the boy. Hey, it's all right. The kid's eyes fluttered open, confusion mixing with terror. Who are you? Mason's heart stopped. The voice was faint, weak, but alive. Caleb, Mason breathed. It's me, it's Dad. The boy frowned, whispering like through a dream. Dad's dead. Mason shook his head, cutting the restraints open with trembling hands. Not yet. Look at me. The boy touched his face as if he couldn't believe the warmth. They said you'd never come. Mason swallowed hard, voice breaking for the first time. They were wrong. He lifted Caleb carefully, wrapping his jacket around him. But before they could move, the sirens blared, shrill, rising from the mansion above. Fiona's voice crackled over comms. They know, Mason. Guards mobilizing. He looked up toward the ridge. 10, maybe 15 men rushing through the tunnels. Ruiz's banner flew in the courtyard. Get him to the truck, Fiona shouted. I'll create a diversion. No, wait, too late. The ridge above exploded into gunfire and shouts. Fiona's figure darted between stone outcrops, firing suppressive bursts. Mason ran with Caleb in his arms through the kennels, dodging bullets tearing through the chain links. When they reached the slope, he stopped short. Fiona lay near the rocks, bleeding, one hand clutching her radio. She looked up at him and smiled through the pain. Told you hell looked like this. He knelt beside her, eyes trembling between fury and grief. You're coming with me. Go. Protect what's left. Finish it. She pressed a small encrypted drive into his hand. This proves everything. Trafficking, murders, political payoffs. End him. He squeezed her shoulder, throat tight. He'll be buried next. Her grip loosened as another explosion shook the ridge. Mason carried Caleb toward the truck, crouching beneath flying debris. Somehow, both reached the road. The boy wept into his chest, half conscious. Behind them, the compound burned, a pyre of everything Mason had lost and everything he had to finish. They drove for hours without stopping, crossing back into U.S. side roads. Rain slicked the windshield, thunder rolling softer now like the storm had finally exhaled. Caleb slept on the seat, head against Mason's arm. For the first time in years, his silence wasn't empty. It was peace, fragile and fleeting. But peace wouldn't last. Not with Ruiz still breathing. When the truck finally stopped at an abandoned rest area, Mason pulled the drive from his pocket, staring at it under the flickering light. Proof. Names. Justice within reach, or destruction. His son stirred beside him. Dad. Yeah, kid. Are we safe now? Mason hesitated. Soon. He looked out toward the night again. The horizon glowed faintly where Ruiz's estate had burned. Soon, he repeated. But in his chest, another voice whispered the same word differently. Not safe, not peace. Only next. The desert never really sleeps. Even when dawn comes, it feels like light is borrowed, temporary, thin, waiting to burn away again. Mason sat behind the wheel, staring at the horizon that always looked the same, yet carried a new ghost every morning. Caleb slept in the passenger seat, wrapped in an old military jacket. Each breath was shallow but steady. Scars mapped across his wrists, bruises fading under his jaw. Mason couldn't look for long. Every mark felt like a sentence he couldn't finish. He drove toward the safe house near the border, an old ranger station repurposed by a friend of Grant's. From there, he planned Ruiz's endgame. But part of him still listened to the sound of Caleb's breathing, afraid it might stop if he blinked too long. They reached the station before sunrise. The building leaned under its own weight, peeling paint and dust like forgotten memories. Mason carried his son inside, laid him on the bed, and checked the wound on his arm, a small infection forming from the wire cuts. He cleaned them, wrapped them in fresh gauze. Caleb stirred. Dad, how long was I gone? Mason hesitated. Too long. The boy's voice cracked. I tried to be brave. They said you'd never find me. He brushed his son's hair back gently. That's what cowards say when they can't finish what they start. Caleb smiled faintly through exhaustion. You really came? Mason nodded. Always. When the boy drifted again, Mason stepped outside. The desert wind carried ash. Somewhere miles away, smoke climbed from Ruiz's destroyed ranch. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. Grant's call came through just after 7 a.m. Mason, what the hell happened? DEA picked up corpses, Cartel chatters off the grid, and Ruiz is still breathing. He was gone before I hit the compound, Mason said. Took everything he needed to start again. You found your kid, didn't you? Yeah. Long silence. Then get him somewhere safe. Don't poke this beast again. Mason didn't answer. The call ended itself. That night, under a blood-red sunset, Mason cleaned his guns in silence. The room dim, the light bulb flickering like it couldn't decide if it wanted to live. Caleb sat across from him, sipping water, quieter than before. He finally asked, Are you going after him? Mason's hands didn't stop moving. I have to. Caleb's voice dropped. You don't have to be a monster to beat one. Mason looked up slowly, the boy's words cutting deeper than any bullet could. Then tell me what you remember, son. Caleb hesitated, staring down at his wrists. They used me to get to Mom. I heard them talking about shipments. Victor thought Mom still had access to your old coordinates, through something you did years ago with the military. He said you cost him millions. Mason frowned. That was classified. Nobody had those files except Central Command. Caleb's eyes lifted. Then how did Victor get them? A chill laced Mason's spine. Someone high up was feeding Ruiz. Maybe even Grant. He shoved his things into his pack, heart hammering. Dad, Caleb rasped. I need you to stay here. Lock the doors. Don't make a sound until I come back. Where are you going? To finish it. The old border compound lay 20 miles west, a skeletal stretch of concrete, once used to smuggle weapons before drones took over the sky. Mason reached it a little after midnight, guided by a fading moon. He scouted the area first. Azure light flickered from one of the towers, power still running. Voices echoed faintly from inside. He crept closer, boots silent against the dust. 2 guards stood on the balcony smoking. One mentioned Ruiz's name, laughing. Said he's headed to Mexico City once he collects proof Burke's back. The man wants the whole world to watch him bury a ghost. The other said, he'll get it done. He always does. Mason took the shot. 2 suppressed cracks. 2 bodies hit the dirt almost in rhythm. Inside, the hall smelled of rust and gasoline. Mason followed the noise, down a corridor, through a half-collapsed door, and froze. The room's walls were lined with monitors replaying video feed. Footage from Ruiz's estate, from interrogation rooms, from desert graves. And there, looping over and over, one frame. Caleb being dragged from a van, crying for his mother. Mason's jaw locked, fists trembling. He found the control desk and smashed the drives. Sparks danced as screens died one by one, until only a single monitor remained alive. Victor's face appeared, grainy but smirking. Ghost, the recording began. If you're watching this, congratulations, you survived the rats. But here's the truth. You never saved your boy. You just borrowed him back. I always collect my debt. Static broke the voice, but Mason's pulse stayed steady, almost too calm. On the screen's corner, a timestamp read live feed, location unknown. And behind Victor, Brooks sat chained to a chair. Mason drove until the engine smoked. He didn't think, didn't breathe, only moved. Every second lost felt like another drop of time stolen from them. He caught Ruiz's signal bouncing off a private airfield north of Juarez, a pattern Grant once taught him to trace. Grant. The thought hit again. Grant had all his intel. The cartel's tracking him. Someone was leaking information with precision too exact to be coincidence. He dialed Grant's line, voice iron. Where is Victor? Burke, calm down, don't lie. Static hummed. He's leaving tonight. Private runway 18 miles east, near Sierra Vista Ridge. It's suicide, Mason. Not if I get there first. Mason, listen, Brooke's alive because of a deal I made. The words dropped like a knife. You knew? I tried to buy you time, you sold me out. He ended the call, eyes hollow. An hour later, he reached the ridge. The runway lay below, lit by dim lights cutting through the fog. 3 men loaded crates into a small jet, engines warming. At the tailgate stood Ruiz, sharp suit, silver hair, face carved from arrogance. Brooke was nowhere in sight. Mason moved through the tall grass until 50 yards from the hangar, rifle steady. But then he saw a truck pull in, Brooke in the passenger seat, wrists still bound. Ruiz dragged her out with a smile that made Mason's vision go red. She spit at him. He laughed. You think your ghost will save you? He never could. Mason lined up the shot. But the moment he started to squeeze, Brooke met his eyes across the tarmac. A silent plea, don't. Ruiz turned, catching movement. Mason ducked as bullets ripped the air. Chaos erupted fast, guards firing, engines roaring, floodlights snapping on. He sprinted between barrels, rolled behind a fuel crate, and opened fire. One guard fell, another dropped screaming. Ruiz dragged Brooke toward the jet, shouting orders. Take off now. Mason rushed forward, reloaded mid-run, and slid beneath the cargo bay door as it began to close. Inside, the plane lurched forward down the cracked strip. Ruiz spun around, eyes widening as Mason rose from the shadows. So, the ghost lives, Ruiz sneered. Mason's voice was low, deadly calm. Only until you don't. The 2 men circled in the narrow cabin as the plane lifted. Ruiz lunged first, knife gleaming. Mason blocked, twisting his arm, sending metal clattering to the floor. Ruiz slammed a fist into his ribs. Mason countered, elbowed him back into a crate. Brooke screamed as the craft rolled, turbulence throwing all 3 across the hold. Ruiz drew his pistol, fired, bullet grazing Mason's shoulder. Pain burned hot, but he lunged anyway, tackling Ruiz against the cockpit door. Why my son? He snarled through gritted teeth. Ruiz laughed through blood. Because pain breeds soldiers. You should thank me. Mason slammed him again, this time hard enough to break bone. Ruiz collapsed, gasping. Thank you. Mason hissed. You buried a child alive. Ruiz spat blood, smiling. Maybe not deep enough. Mason froze. What do you mean? Ruiz coughed, whispering. 2 coffins were filled that night. Before he could ask, Ruiz twisted free and fired once more. Mason kicked the gun aside. The bullet tore through the windshield. The cabin depressurized, wind screaming through broken glass. Ruiz stumbled toward the hatch, reaching for the parachute strapped behind the pilot's seat. Mason grabbed his arm, one brutal twist, and shoved. The man's scream vanished into the roar of the storm below. The pilot shouted from the cockpit, trying to stabilize, while alarms shrieked. Mason dragged Brooke close, shouting over the noise. Hold on. The plane lurched violently, half the cabin tearing away as debris streamed into darkness. The world spun, fire streaking across the wings. They crashed somewhere in the mountains, the sound of metal meeting rock, sparks against rain, bone against gravity. Silence. Smoke. Rain hitting twisted steel. Mason opened his eyes first, body screaming. He turned, Brooke beside him, unconscious but breathing. Victor's corpse was nowhere in sight. He crawled to the broken hatch, peering into the abyss below. The canyon stretched wide, fog swallowing everything. The storm muffled its secrets. No trace of Ruiz. Only darkness. Mason leaned his head back against the shattered fuselage, every muscle trembling, but his eyes steady. If you're not dead, he whispered into the wind. Then hell's got a waiting line. Behind him, Brooke groaned softly, starting to wake. And somewhere far below, lost in the storm and rock, a single flashlight flickered alive in the depths of the canyon. Wind howled through the canyon all night, dragging smoke and thin rain across the broken mountainside. The wreckage of the downed jet burned in slow embers, metal hissing, wires glowing like veins of dying fire. Mason moved inside the shattered fuselage, pushing debris away until he found Brooke pinned under a twisted support beam. He bent down, gritted teeth, and lifted the beam just enough for her to crawl free. Blood smeared her sleeve. Her lips split. "You alive?" he asked. Her eyes opened, hollow but aware. "Barely." Outside, dawn hadn't come yet, just the deep gray that pretends light is close. He looked over the edge of the canyon. It went on forever, long drop, jagged rock, fog that refused to move. Brooke followed his gaze. "Is he down there?" she whispered. Mason stared for a long moment before answering. "If he is, Earth got the meal she wanted." Brooke tried to stand, stumbled. Pain flashed across her face. "We can't stay. They'll track the crash." "We?" Mason said dryly, cleaning blood from his knuckles with a torn rag. "You still think you're on my side?" She didn't answer right away. Slowly, she reached into her torn jacket and pulled out a small metal drive, identical to the one Fiona had given him. "He was planning to flee with both," she said. "One holds everything. The politicians, the soldiers, the deals. The other has what he filmed. Your son. The night it happened." Mason's jaw tightened. "You watched it." Her head lowered. "Once. Long ago. I didn't have the courage to stop it then. Maybe this gives you reason to." He took the drive without a word, his hands shaking so slightly it almost went unnoticed. When the second explosion ripped across the hillside, they both turned fast, fuel tank bursting under delayed ignition. Flames climbed up again like the desert wanted to erase what was left. "Let's move out," he said. They climbed down the mountain through ash until daylight cracked over the ridge. Mason's shoulder burned from the bullet wound, but he never slowed. Brooke followed, limping quietly. By mid-morning, they reached an abandoned railway siding along the valley floor. Old rusted boxcars, graffiti faded under years of wind. They found cover inside one. Mason set up his tablet from the pack, slotting the drive in. The screen flickered to life with archived footage. He hit play. At first, just static. Then video, shaky handheld footage from a desert clearing. Voices. The cartel standing around a dug pit. Two men forcing a small figure to kneel. "Caleb." Brooke turned away instantly, hands over her mouth. The recording shook as Ruiz's voice filled the speaker. "Make him talk." His daddy learned slow. Mason froze. Every muscle stiffened until he felt his heartbeat in his teeth. Then came the twist that shattered breath itself. Ruiz's voice again. "No, leave the kid breathing. We'll trade pain for loyalty. Start with the mother." Mason looked up sharply. Brooke's body crumpled into herself, shoulders shaking as the next sound came through, her screaming, pleading, begging for her son's life. He shut the tablet off. The silence after was alive with guilt, thick enough to choke. "I told you," she whispered. "He used me. He made me choose between you and our boy." Mason finally spoke, voice low, cracked. "And you chose fear." Tears rolled quietly down her face. "You would have done the same." He looked at her then, really looked. "No, Brooke. I would have died first." He stood abruptly, pushing away from the screen. "We're done. Get to Mexico if you want life. I'm ending this where it started, before he makes another ghost." She caught his arm before he left. "You think killing him brings peace? When it's over, you'll still have earth in your throat, same as him." He didn't answer, just pulled away gently, the kind of quiet that says everything words never can. By noon, the sun scorched the canyon. Mason followed faint tire tracks down a narrow dirt road that cut inland toward a quarry marked on Fiona's old maps. The last coordinates Ruiz ever used. Half a mile in, he stopped dead. Chains hung from the cliffside, old ones, rusted, stained. Below them, shallow pits filled with mud, bones, and forgotten crosses. The red quarry. He dropped to one knee. The wind carried a slow hum through the metal, almost a voice. He could feel it. Caleb's ghost there, watching, waiting. Mason took the drive from his pocket, the one with cartel names, and buried it beneath a rock. "You keep this safe," he muttered. "I only need one ending." Footsteps crunched behind him. Not Brooke. Too steady, too trained. He turned with the gun drawn. From the veil of dust stepped Grant. Mason's eyes narrowed. I should have known. Grant held up his palms. No weapon visible. Easy. I tried stopping Ruiz. You know that. You fed him intel, Mason said flatly. He always knew my moves. Grant's jaw tensed. He had leverage, Mason. Not just you. They had my daughter. That excuse sound familiar? Mason shot back. You sold honor for blood. Grant sighed, lowering his eyes. Look, I gave you Ruiz's trail on purpose. Figured if anyone could bury him, it'd be you. But we both know he's not gone. His body never found. Mason stepped closer, cold fury controlled. You came here to warn me? Grant nodded once. And to give you this. He handed over a folded paper, a location scribbled hastily. Judge Romero, New Mexico Federal Safe House. Romero's the one who laundered Ruiz's shipments through legal aid funds. He has every remaining file. If you want to end this clean, you'll need him alive. Mason tucked it away. You finish your part, Grant. I'll finish mine. Grant started to speak again, but stopped as the sound of engines echoed from afar. 2 jeeps cresting the canyon entrance. Ruiz is back up. Go, Grant hissed. Mason slid deeper into the quarry, vanishing between shadows and heat. The jeeps rolled in, dust spiraling like ghosts rising. Mason moved silently along the upper ridge, knife in one hand, pistol in the other. 2 shots, clean, efficient, dropped the first pair. A third man called out, spinning to see nothing, just smoke curling near the rocks. By the time he realized, Mason was behind him. One twist, one silent throw, no words. When the smoke cleared, only silence again. He reloaded as Grant emerged from cover below, staring at the aftermath. You never change, he muttered. Mason didn't look down. No, I just finally stopped pretending. He checked the paper again, Judge Romero. The next lead, the one that would pull every thread together. Ruiz's money, his reach, his corruption. He looked back once more at the quarry, where crosses stood like old soldiers frozen mid-salute. All of this ends at the courthouse, he said quietly, mostly to the wind. Grant nodded grimly. Let's hope justice remembers your name this time. Mason's eyes flickered toward the horizon. No emotion, no warmth, just purpose. He turned back toward the road, blood still drying on his knuckles, voice barely a whisper meant only for the air. Justice doesn't need my name, just my aim. He holstered the weapon and started walking again. The wind carried the scent of rain but offered no mercy, only distance. Somewhere behind him, Brooke was disappearing south across the desert. Somewhere ahead, Ruiz's shadow breathed through the cracks of power and law. And Mason Burke, the man they once called Ghost, kept moving between both worlds, bleeding but unbroken, chasing the one truth that still mattered. His son lived. Now someone else had to die? The courthouse in Santa Fe looked too clean for what it hid. Polished stone steps, the American flag snapping under pale winter wind. None of it fit the rot Mason could already smell underneath. He parked 2 blocks away, engine idling, eyes fixed on the tall windows of the federal judicial wing where Judge Romero was scheduled to testify that morning. Inside that courtroom, corruption wore expensive suits. Outside, ghosts waited in silence. He adjusted his collar, checked the mag in his pistol, and slipped a folded photograph into his jacket pocket. Caleb on his 7th birthday, cake half smashed, grin too wide to fit the frame. That image kept his pulse even, his nerves steady. Grant's note said Romero wasn't fully dirty, not yet. He'd taken Ruiz's money, laundered the cartel's charity cash, but never personally spilled blood. He knew everything, and that made him the last bridge between Victor's empire and the world that still called itself law. Mason's job wasn't to kill him. Not this one. This one needed to speak. When he entered the courthouse, heads turned, but no one stopped him. He moved like someone who knew where everything was. Even the exits they'd forgotten existed. He found Romero's chambers on the 2nd floor. Oak doors, thick windows overlooking the plaza. Inside, the judge sat behind a desk stacked high with documents, his face pale, eyes darting toward the noise echoing outside. Mason shut the door softly behind him. "Who the hell? Don't call security." The judge froze halfway out of his chair. "You're Burke." Mason's expression didn't change. "Then you already know why I'm here." Romero pointed shakily toward the files on his desk. "I was going to testify. You think I'm like Ruiz? I was trapped. You don't get out from under him alive." Mason stepped closer, the distance between them shrinking to the size of truth. "Then start by proving you're different." He placed Fiona's encrypted drive on the desk, the one with cartel names, bank routings, transfers, and footage of Ruiz's operations. Romero flinched as if the metal were radioactive. "You don't understand what's in this." "I do," Mason said quietly. "I buried what it cost." The judge swallowed, hands trembling as he inserted the drive into his computer. A cascade of data filled the screen. Money transfers linking Ruiz's men to congressional staffers, police chiefs, even border officials. Thousands of names that had made Ruiz untouchable for years. Romero whispered, "You could bring down half the Southwest with this." "That's the point." Outside, the wind shifted. Mason caught it before Romero did. The heavy hum of an approaching engine, low tires on stone. Through the glass, 3 SUVs turned into the plaza below, tinted windows gleaming. Romero's face went white. "He found me." Mason snapped the hard drive free, pocketed it. "Then talk fast." "He planned for this," Romero gasped. "He said if I flipped, he'd burn the courthouse." Everyone inside. Mason grabbed him by the collar. "How?" "Gas main in the basement. His men rigged it when the renovation started. One phone call. We all." A distant explosion answered his sentence. The floor jerked beneath them. Smoke rolled under the doorway, sirens wailing almost instantly. "Move," Mason barked, yanking the judge toward the emergency exit. They pushed through the stairwell, choking on dust and the stench of burning plaster. 2 floors down, they met Ruiz's men storming upward, black suits, rifles, surgical precision. Mason dragged the judge behind a column and fired first. 3 shots, clean. 2 targets down before they even saw him. The third ducked, shouting into his radio. "Target alive, southeast stairwell." Mason ripped a fire extinguisher from the wall and hurled it. The pressurized metal slammed into the man's chest, toppling him over the railing. The crunch that followed was final. Romero staggered behind him, coughing. "What are you getting you out? You don't testify, everything dies." They burst into the lobby as ceiling tiles crashed down like hail. The courthouse burned from the inside out, flames crawling along the walls where gas lines ruptured. Mason spotted daylight through shattered doors. They weren't free yet. Ruiz's convoy blocked the street. Men poured out, rifles raised. He shoved Romero behind a marble pillar. "Stay low." He sprinted across open ground, fired 2 bursts from the rifle he'd picked up. One SUV's windshield exploded, driver slumped. Chaos spread fast. Then, from the far end of the plaza, someone fired back. Single shot, perfect aim. Grant's voice echoed through the smoke. "Enough, Mason." Mason blinked through the haze. Grant stood there, weapon drawn but not aimed yet. "You don't want to cross this line," Grant called out. "I already did," Mason shouted back. Grant's tone hardened. "Victor's dead." "Prove it." "He's finished, Mason." The man's body was found at the crash site. Mason's grip didn't ease. "Then why are his men still protecting ghosts?" Grant hesitated. Mason stepped forward, realization dawning too late. The radio's still on Ruiz's channel, the SUVs running with cartel timing. Grant's eyes dropped to the band at his wrist, blinking red. A detonation signal. "Don't," Mason began, but the explosion ripped through before the words left his mouth. The plaza erupted into shrapnel and fire. Mason Dove shielded the judge under a desk blown from inside the lobby. Heat punched up through his armor. Smoke swallowed everything. When the echo faded, Grant lay motionless across the street, body half covered by burning debris. Romero choked beside him. "We can't stay, I know." Mason dragged him toward a side alley, wedged open an emergency hatch to the old storm tunnel system beneath the city. They crawled through ash until sound turned to silence again. Hours later, inside a mechanic's warehouse on the outskirts, Romero sat shaking, oxygen mask pressed to his face. Mason watched him from across the table. "You'll testify tomorrow," Mason said quietly. "You'll name everyone. You'll bury what's left of Ruiz's empire." Romero swallowed. "And you?" "I'll make sure there's something left to testify to." The judge nodded weakly. "They'll come for us both. They'll try." He turned toward the window. Outside, the sun finally broke through the layer of ash and smoke, casting long shadows that reached clear across the dusty floor. Every fight he'd ever fought had ended like this. Silence. Aftermath. Ghosts counting each breath beside him. He looked down at his son's bracelet still tied to his wrist, the silver faint beneath fresh dirt and dried blood. He whispered, "Hold on a little longer, kid. One more storm." Because only one person hadn't been confirmed dead, Victor Ruiz. And Mason had learned one truth in all his years as a soldier and a father: devils never die easy. The morning after the courthouse fire smelled of smoke and betrayal. The news called it a gas explosion. The feds claimed there were no survivors inside. Mason watched the broadcast from an old diner outside Santa Fe, a bandage around his arm and silence heavy between him and the plate of untouched eggs. The reporter kept repeating the same words: "Federal Judge Daniel Romero missing. Possible foul play suspected. Missing. Not dead." Mason had gotten him out. That was something. He pulled out Fiona's encrypted drive from his pocket. Still intact through the blast. Dozens of names. Wire transfers. Proof that would collapse everything Ruiz had built. If he could deliver it. The waitress refilled his coffee without looking at him. "You okay, hon?" He only nodded. When she left, he glanced at the window. Across the street, a black sedan hadn't moved in 20 minutes. Sleek, tinted, breathing trouble. He slipped a few bills under the mug, stood up, and left through the kitchen door. The alley outside was narrow, sun trapped between bricks. Mason pulled his gun, waited, and watched the sedan mirror for movement. When none came, he stepped out first, and the world tilted again. A rifle cracked. Concrete spat dust inches from his head. He ducked, rolled behind a trash container, returned 2 shots at the roofline. One figure dropped. A second fired from the car's back door. 3 shots later, the sedan's windshield shattered, alarm blaring. Mason approached, wary, then stopped when he saw who was inside. Brooke. Her face pale, eyes bloodshot, hands zip-tied to the wheel. A strip of duct tape hung half-torn from her mouth. The second shooter, dead, still gripped a phone with Ruiz's serpent insignia. Mason yanked the tape off. "What's this?" She coughed, voice raw. "Victor's alive. Mexico City. He's pulling everything south before the files burn him here." Mason's jaw tightened. "He sent this to stop me? To lure you back," she whispered. "He knows you can't let go." He stared at her for a long second, then cut the ties, pulling her gently from the car. She looked ruined, not just physically, but down where guilt lives. "You don't have to keep saving me," she said softly when he started the truck. "I'm not," Mason answered. "You're bait now." They crossed into Mexico before dusk, rain falling like sifted glass through the smog. Grant's map, still folded in Mason's jacket, showed a location northeast of Mexico City, La Fortaleza, a former military compound. Ruiz's rumored fallback. Mason's headlights cut through Jungle Road, every branch brushing the windshield like the world didn't want them there. "He won't run anymore," Mason said quietly. "He's cornered." Brooke looked ahead, face unreadable. "He's many things, Mason. Cornered isn't one of them." At the compound gate, they found 2 bodies hanging from chains. Ruiz's message: loyalty or death. Past the gate, floodlights swept the yard. Men with rifles paced patrol routes. Too organized for mercenaries. Mason spotted a faint glimmer on the tower, a motion sensor. He fired one silenced shot. Sparks burst. Lights died. "Stay behind me," he whispered. Brooke clutched her coat tighter. They crept through dark corridors that smelled of oil and mildew. Voices echoed ahead. At the far end, stairs descended into a bunker glowing orange from firelight. Ruiz waited below, sitting at a steel table, perfectly calm. Scar across his jaw, left arm splinted, broken ribs maybe, but alive. In his hand, a handgun rested like a handshake waiting to happen. "Mason Burke," he said, smiling. "The ghost himself. Took you long enough." Mason leveled his own weapon. "You should have stayed buried." "I did," Ruiz said lightly. "You're the one who keeps digging up graves." He tossed something across the floor, Caleb's broken bracelet. It slid to Mason's boots. He didn't lower the gun. "You took everything from me." "What?" Ruiz spread his hands. "Money dies fast. Fear lasts forever. You were a soldier. I needed one I couldn't buy." He leaned forward, whispering like it was personal again. "So I built you, Ghost. You just didn't know who your general was." Brooke gasped. Mason's eyes didn't blink. "You had command files," Ruiz continued. "Missions nobody else could trace. And all I had to do was own the aftermath. That's how kings are made." Mason pulled the trigger halfway down, steady. "No kings where you're going." The air shifted, the faint click behind him. "Brooke." He turned halfway as she raised another pistol, eyes wet but determined. "Mason, stop," she whispered, voice shaking. "You kill him now, they'll erase everything. The files die with him." Ruiz chuckled, leaning back. "Listen to your queen." Brooke's arm trembled. "You have the proof. Use it. Don't lose your soul now." "Already lost it," Mason said. He turned back to Ruiz, gun aimed. "Last confession." Ruiz's smirk twitched. "God doesn't listen to ghosts." Mason fired once. The bullet tore through Ruiz's chest. Blood splattered across the metal table. The sound echoed too long and too loud for any forgiveness left in the world. Ruiz's head tilted back, whispering something that vanished with his breath. Brooke lowered her gun, hands shaking violently. Mason stood still, his own breath shallow. There was no triumph, no music, just the smell of gunpowder and relief that didn't feel like peace. Brooke stepped closer, tears streaking her ash-covered face. "You did it," she said softly. He finally looked at her. "No, we did this years ago. Tonight just caught up." Sirens rose outside, the compound burning again, engines closing in. DEA units, maybe, or Ruiz's last soldiers. It didn't matter. Mason glanced at her. "Run west when the shooting starts. There's a ridge half a mile out. A contact waiting. Tell them Burke's debt's paid." Brooke reached for him, but he was already moving toward the roar of engines. Outside, headlights cut through the smoke. Mason reloaded calmly, movements slow but deliberate. The first truck came in firing. He returned every shot. Explosions painted the night with molten streaks. By the time the second wave arrived, he was already gone, slipping into the burning brush behind the compound, lost again to darkness and rain. Back inside, Brooke found Ruiz's body slumped in his own blood. She picked up the fallen bracelet from the floor, turning it over slowly. For the first time, she smiled through tears. Miles away, Mason reached the river crossing as dawn broke. Cold light spread over the horizon, clean, empty. He tossed his pistol into the water, watched ripples fade. From the truck seat beside him, Caleb's voice, faint, imagined, said the same words he once wrote years ago. "Anger makes you lose your way, Dad." He looked down at the bracelet in his palm, the edges worn smooth with history. He tied it back onto his wrist. Then he started the engine and drove toward the new sun rising over the mountains, towards somewhere quieter, somewhere that might forgive. Behind him, black smoke curled from the valley like the earth itself, closing a chapter.